Hi, I'm Nigel Bailey, Southampton-based photographer with over 40 years experience in landscapes, astro landscapes and woodland photography. Great to have you with me. If you've had enough of your Christmas pictures looking like this, and you'd rather they look like this, and you're heading out to somewhere like this, then why not join me in the next 10 minutes or so, and I'll give you 7 great tips for how to improve your photography of Christmas lights at this great time of year. Hi, welcome back to my little channel. Great to be with you again. This is a slightly different kind of one to me, and it's very seasonal. We're in the Christmas season, and so I've been out doing Christmassy things with the family, and I thought, well, I might be able to share a little bit of helpfulness, a little bit of Christmas helpfulness around. So one of the things that we've been doing, and we've done in previous years, is go and see some Christmas lights. And so there's various ones of these around the country. We've been to the Longleat Christmas lights before. That was a long time ago, about 10 years ago. And more recently we've been to Hilliers Gardens north of Romsey in Hampshire. And along the way I've learnt a few things about what to do and what not to do when photographing said lights. And I thought it might be helpful, it might be useful just to share 1 or 2 of those tips. So here are 7, I hope, helpful tips about what to do when it comes to photographing Christmas lights. Okay, so tip number 1, that is, well, most of these are to do with the actual camera. It's how to shoot. I'm not going to go into post-processing in this video. That's a whole nother matter. Important thing is let's capture some data and we can worry about processing it later. Let's get the capturing right. The first thing we're going to need to do is set our camera mode to manual. And if you're photographing this kind of stuff and you want to do a good job of it, I'm going to assume that you've got some basic knowledge of how to do that and how to put your camera into manual. With mine it looks something like this. There's a little dial on the top of the Nikon, and most cameras will have something quite similar. What I wouldn't suggest that you do is just leave it in auto mode. You might strike lucky, but chances are that the camera is going to not get the compensation right, depending on how much of your picture is filled with these images of lovely, colourful, lighted subjects. Then it's probably going to get it wrong. You might find that the shadows are really dark. If they're not, then the highlights are probably going to be blown out. So I would shoot in manual. Second one, shoot in RAW mode, not in JPEG mode. And you're going to need to do this because basically the camera is going to get a lot more detail in RAW, and you're going to have a much better level of dynamic range. You're going to be able to pull more detail out of the shadows, and you're less likely to be blowing out the highlights. So shoot in RAW mode. Okay, number 3. Set your aperture reasonably wide. It doesn't have to be an f2.8 lens, that's not really necessary. Most of the shots that I've done have tended to be at about f4 to f5.6, something like that. Most kit lenses will go to f5.6, maybe f6.3, something like that, depending on the lens, but most of them will get down to something like f5.6, and that'll be absolutely fine for this kind of photography. Okay, next one, and that's the ISO. Set your ISO, that's the sensitivity of the camera sensor and the camera to the level of light input, and that's going to be really high, probably something akin to what you would use for astrophotography. So I've set mine typically to either something like about 2,500 to 3,200. With modern cameras these days, the level of noise that you're going to get is going to be reasonably acceptable, and certainly at a level where a program like Lightroom in post-processing is going to be able to eliminate most of that noise. Next one, check the histogram. And if I just show you on the back of my camera here now, and I put it on histogram mode, here we go. So the histogram is this little feature down here, and you'll see on this one at the moment that I'm blowing out the highlights because I'm pointing at the screen, which is the equivalent of a light source, and on the right hand edge of the histogram here you can see that you've got a white line up the right hand edge. We don't want to see that. What we want to do is reduce our level of exposure so that we're pretty much just getting up to the right hand edge of the histogram. That means we're not blowing out highlights, and we've got a little bit of flexibility to go either way with that. The further to the right it is also, the less likely we are to be clipping the shadows, and so we'll be able to draw more detail out of the shadows that way. Next one, keep experimenting. It's likely that as you go around some of these light shows, you're going to be wanting to photograph some wider scenes and some much more closer cropped in scenes, and so do keep experimenting. So you'll probably find that you haven't got to vary things too much. I would tend to keep the ISO pretty much as it is, and as far as possible the aperture. The main thing that you're likely to change here is going to be your shutter speed, but don't let your shutter speed get too low. And so this is the next tip really, is to set your shutter speed. Now I started off on my last shoot with something like a 1/60th, which was fine. What I did find that meant that the shadows really were a little bit dark. So it depends what you're shooting. So if you want to be able to show the ground, so on this shot, for example, I wanted to be able to see the grass beneath this field of tulips that had been created, and they were really nice. And so I actually dropped the exposure level, increased the exposure from 1/60th of a second to 1/40th of a second. Now bear in mind this is handheld, but I'm shooting with a Nikon Z2, and at a 40th of a second, that's absolutely fine, as long as I'm not using all 200mm of the zoom lens that I was shooting with. And so 1/40th of a second was absolutely fine with that. But if you're starting to get down to 1/20th of a second, 1/25th, even a 30th of a second, and depending on how long a focal length you're using, you're definitely going to increase the risk of getting some camera shake. And that's just one of those things that you just can't get rid of in post-processing. So let's just summarize those, shall we? So firstly, set your camera to manual. This is going to allow you to tell your camera exactly what to do, because otherwise it's going to get a bit confused in this situation. 2, shoot in RAW, not in JPEG. It's going to give you far more dynamic range. You're going to be able to get more detail, and you'll be able to clean it up better. Set your aperture to something like about f4, f5.6. Doesn't need to be as low as f2.8, and if it's too low, if the aperture is too wide, you're going to start to struggle with depth of field. Set your ISO to about 3200 or thereabouts. All of these settings will then allow you to play around with your exposure speed, your exposure settings, and that might be anywhere between about a 40th of a second up to about 1/60th of a second. Keep checking your histogram and experiment. Don't blow out your highlights, and just make sure that you're keeping within that range, just butting up to the right hand edge of the histogram. And then finally, a little bonus tip here. This is that it doesn't matter how well you do this stuff technically, You can have the cleanest image in the world, and you can get all of that technical stuff just right. But if your composition is rubbish, then you've just wasted your time. I've got a couple of examples here. There was this little field of tulips, and so the first image that I took of said tulips, right, okay, this one here. Let's go to full screen on this. Now, notice that in the middle of the lower half of the image, I'm looking at the back of a sign, and on the other side of it says, "Caution, uneven surface." Yeah, not my finest moment as a photographer. Now, I did manage to remove it, as you can see here in Photoshop. Would have been a lot better if I didn't have to do that in the first place, wouldn't it? So I then realised my mistake there, and I moved a little bit further up the field until I was just past that sign, and then I could get a photograph of this field of tulips then without the sign in the way. So I hope that's been useful. A little bit of seasonal advice there, and I hope that you get the opportunity to use it this side of Christmas. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll leave you now with a few select images from some Christmas lights that I've shot this year and in the past. See you again next time. Bye for now.
I've been waiting for the day that is coming. Hearts have been rising and eyes have been opening. Ring out the bells, sing all your voices, joyfully bring him the glory now. We will bring our praises, we will rise to him. Of Bethlehem, of Bethlehem.